Marcois, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Thanks, Tiffany. Always a pleasure to be with you.
To begin, world leaders are contemplating a return of Trump to the White House. Now, that's after Trump's remarks on the weekend, where he was saying that when he was president, he told the leaders of NATO that he would look the other way if Russia were to invade. Now, the head of NATO said his suggestion, quote, undermines all of our security. What do you make of Trump's remarks here?
Well, I love this issue. It's a perfect illustration of what a friend of mine describes as they'll take what you say, they'll twist it into something you didn't say, and then they'll condemn you for something you didn't say. Trump told a story to a rally, and what he was doing was boasting of his ability to negotiate, and he was talking about NATO. When he came into NATO, most of our NATO allies were woefully under their committed levels of spending. Every NATO member has committed to spend at least 2% of their gross domestic product, their GDP, on defense spending. Now, the U.S. spends 4.5%. Finland, Lithuania, Latvia spend more than 3%. Poland spends almost 4%. Other than that, almost nobody meets their NATO commitment. France spends almost 2%, right around 2%. I would bet you $1 that the country he was talking about was Germany, because Germany, when Trump first came into office, was woefully under their 2% commitment. And what he was doing to them is saying, listen, we have this Article 5, but you guys have been free riding on American taxpayers for your defense, and it's time for you to start paying. And whatever country it was, I don't want to slander Germany if it wasn't them, whatever country it was, the leader said, well, what would you do if we didn't? Essentially daring Trump to ignore their failure to meet their commitment. And he answered with that. And so now people are taking that and blowing that up into something where they're saying, oh, Trump said he's not going to support NATO. It's not what he said at all. He was making a point that he knows how to be tough. And by the way, all those countries increased their NATO spending significantly. Germany is much higher than it was. It's still too low, but it's much higher than it was. France was lower. It's now up almost to 2%, and so forth. So it worked.
Now, on the note of funds, Trump is now railing against the Senate foreign aid bill, saying that the money should instead be loaned. Now, what would that change if this money were loaned out? Is it accountability, transparency? What would that change?
Not much, to be honest with you. It's a good suggestion. It at least creates an obligation that after the war is over, when Ukraine returns to being a very wealthy, very prosperous country, that they would have a responsibility to pay us back. But, you know, there's something, if I may, there's an idea that they could do about Ukraine. Trump has a point about, and the Republicans have a point about spending in Ukraine. There are other ways to spend money to win the war in Ukraine. We should be encouraging Ukraine to use their spectacular military intelligence group that's had all these accomplishments in special operations to go after Putin's energy supply, go after the export ports, the production centers, the internal transport centers. They've been doing that for the last year. They should be encouraged to do more of that. It's a lot cheaper than artillery shells, and it would make the guys on Ukraine's front line safer, because it would deprive Putin of the money he needs to buy his weapons and his armaments and to pay more soldiers in his army. And that's the only way you're going to win it, is if you starve Putin. We should bankrupt Putin. We should bankrupt Putin, not ourselves, in this war.
Now, delving into this Senate foreign aid bill, Ohio Senator J.D. Vance is saying, quote, buried in the bill's text is an impeachment time bomb for the next Trump presidency if he tries to stop funding the war in Ukraine. This is something that Senator Rand Paul agrees with. Now, what would this mean if Trump does win his second term?
You know, the funny thing about this issue is everybody is expecting that Trump will win in November. They're all looking at the situation and they're saying, "Oh my gosh, Trump is coming back," and they're panicking. And I think J.D. Vance is right. I had not been aware of that issue until he tweeted about it. I went and I read his tweet, I read his letter, I looked at the language in the bill, and there really is a poison pill in there. They're setting up Trump so that if he says we are not going to spend this money in Ukraine again, that they can impeach him on the same grounds of the phony impeachment, whatever year that was, 2020, 2019, 2020, when they impeached him before. They expect him to win, and this is one of who knows how many hundreds or perhaps thousands of preparations that they're making so that they can undermine him again when he's president again.
Quite fascinating indeed. Bart Marcois, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me on.